And joining us for more in our LA studio is Russ Baker. He's founder and editor-in-chief of whowhatwhy.com. We want to talk a little bit more about this. So just looking back, did 9/11, you think, mark a new era where the U.S. could go after countries in the name of terrorism as sponsors, even when they had nothing to do with al-Qaeda or a terrorist threat to the U.S.?
It clearly did. First of all, we had a group with which Dick Cheney was connected called the Project for the New American Century. And prior to 2001, they had proclaimed the need to project much greater American military might around the world, but said that it wouldn't be possible without the equivalent of another Pearl Harbor. Whether that was just a lucky guess or something more, we don't know. But the fact of the matter is that the moment after the 9/11 attacks, Bush began already trying to divert attention away from Afghanistan, where they were harboring al-Qaeda, to Iraq. And even Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, was perplexed by this and has said so.
Is it based in reality? Has it ever been? Because Saudi Arabia is an ally, and evidence has come out that Saudi Arabia could have had some kind of a role supporting the hijackers or involved in 9/11. They've never been named as the axis of evil.
Correct. It's a very selective naming. Libya is an interesting situation because, and we've done quite a bit of reporting on this on whowhatwhy.com, taking a careful look at the origins of the uprising in Libya, and we found that basically Gaddafi has been very, very cooperative with the West for a number of years, but with the Arab Spring, there was some sort of determination made that they could do better. I think that it's not just the United States, it's the French and the Italians. All of these countries, the Russians, the Chinese, everybody is looking for resources, they're looking for minerals. There's a mad scramble all over the world, and so in order to justify when you're doing it in a military way, such as the United States and NATO is doing it, they've got to have a good PR spin on it. They've got to get the American people behind it, and the American people are not going to get behind something where they just call it a raw resource grab. So terms like axis of evil are very, very handy indeed.
So is resources what you think this all boils down to, that they'll find, politicians will find any way to spin the message from a PR standpoint, whether it's terrorism or protecting civilians, but that essentially the through line here is that it comes down to resources?
Well, sure. I mean, it always has been. It's not fair to single out the United States in that respect. All countries are chiefly concerned about power and resources and maintaining their standard of living and so forth, and that's the reality. But of course, you can never say that. You can't go on television and say we're in Libya with 7,000 bombing runs because they're sitting on one of the world's best supplies of sweet crude. You just can't say that.
Well, every country needs resources, but not every country goes and bombs other countries to get them.
That's true, and we've got to find another way of meeting our needs. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with shifting away from fossil fuels to alternative sources of energy, but again, that's something else that the industries in the United States are resisting.
Well, and that's a whole other subject of competing, because we've seen solar plants, for example, not be able to compete with China, even with U.S. subsidies. That's another conversation, but I'm just curious, looking present day, 10 years after this axis of evil conversation, when terrorism was first used to justify war with any country, even if they weren't involved. As we talk about Libya, and as people look at Syria, and there's no threat to the United States, but yet we've seen the U.S. get involved in Libya, has it gotten worse to where you don't even need a justification of a threat to the U.S. anymore to go to war?
Well, certainly with Libya, they didn't have any kind of threat like that. They actually played a new card, which was the humanitarian card, and they said, we're going in there to protect the people, and we'll be in there for a very short period of time. Quickly, that fell by the wayside, and we even have the chief British generals actually coming right out and saying, no, it wasn't ever about that at all. We wanted to remove we wanted to remove Gaddafi, and that's what we're going to do. So, yeah, I mean, they keep bringing up these new, I think in Obama's case, they had to go with the humanitarian argument because the other ones were not going to fly with his political base.
But I guess what I'm trying to get at, and this is just a quick answer, please, but is this the same thing that we've always seen where you're saying this is a PR spin put on to sell a war? Or is this a situation that's getting worse, where less justification is needed for going to war, for bombing people?
Oh, absolutely. Less justification is needed every year, and we can see that when we transition from a very hawkish Republican president to a purportedly liberal Democratic president who ends up doing the exact same thing.
It's an interesting point to make, and I appreciate you being here to make it. That was Russ Baker, founder and editor-in-chief of WhoWhatWhy.com.